How many of us do tumor surgery in the audience? Yeah, okay. So not as much, but it's a part of spine surgery, and I have a particular interest in it only because we're affiliated with the Dana-Farber, and we do see a fair number of it. Here are my disclosures, none of which are related to this talk. So the Patchell study in 2005 was basically a game changer. Prior to this, and actually even still now in some areas, people just think you have spinal mets, epidural disease, pathologic fracture, you're dead. So get radiation and go to hospice, and that's it. But the Patchell study showed that in symptomatic patients with epidural compression, within their inclusion criteria, surgery actually has a huge benefit over not doing surgery and just giving radiation. There is ambulation preservation and even survival benefit to it. And so, with this paper, it kind of changed the perspective, right? That these patients, though you can't necessarily cure them of cancer, you can still make a huge impact. And so now there's been a little bit of a shift to trying to select the right people for these types of surgeries. And so, here you have a pathologic fracture with some epidural disease in the thoracic spine or in the lumbar spine. And, again, it's still in many areas, I think, where there aren't surgeons who do the surgeries, these patients will go on systemic treatment, radiation, and then just, however it goes, it goes. But if you do a corpectomy, spinal reconstruction on this, these patients who come in either in severe pain and or weak and or myelopathic actually can get better from it. But the problem with it is that you got to do something like this. You got to open them up in general and get in and do it. Now, there are MIS ways. People have been publishing and reporting on ways of doing these kinds of surgeries smaller. But in general, this is still a surgical problem if and when you see these patients with tumors that need to be decompressed and stabilized. Sorry, this is a little bit out of order. So, what happens when you have something like this where you have multiple mets in multiple spots, and they're either cancer patients that are in their third line of treatment with a poor functional status, number of mets not only in the spine but throughout the body, or on the flip side, someone who's asymptomatic. We do so much MR surveillance on these patients that you'll see an asymptomatic patient but with cord compression who's already had radiation to that area and can't really get more. And with these newer targeted immunotherapies and other targeted therapies, these patients are living longer with cancer, but they have a lesion, right? What do we do with those, right? Neither of these categories fit into the Patchell study, meaning that if they had no symptoms, they shouldn't have been getting surgery. And if they're too sick, they shouldn't be having surgery either. So how many are familiar with LIT, with laser therapy? The neurosurgeons probably are, just because it's in the brain world. And laser interstitial thermotherapy has been used for lung and liver and renal and other soft tissue tumors in the body, where you basically stick a probe in and a laser heats up an element that can somewhat finely control the level of heat that you're applying to an area. And the idea behind this is that it's minimally invasive. It's a percutaneous or burr hole type procedure. So LIT for brain tumors, for gliomas and mets, has been in the neurosurgical literature for a little while now. And Claudio Tatsui at MD Anderson started applying this to spinal cord tumors, spinal tumors with epidural compression. And this is from his publication in 15 or 16, where you can see these lesions, and he puts these probes in, and this is all MR guided as well, so you need heavy duty imaging to be able to do this. But he crosses the paths on the epidural tumor, and eventually can get. I didn't show that picture, but eventually can get epidural tumor regression. And this is all done with just a couple percutaneous lead or trocar placements. The problem, or not the problem, this has been done pretty extensively in the brain, and Claudio's been doing it a lot in the spine, and other people have been doing it in different parts of the body. But there are some issues with LIT, and this is just one example of complications that can occur. But we've had at least two between the Brigham and Children's with brain tumors. And none of this is published, right? No one's going to publish this. But patients have gotten LIT to the parameters that were instructed, and patients have died, right? They go into massive brain edema and have herniated and died. There was one index case at the Brigham, so now the person who kind of was doing it a lot doesn't do it much anymore. And there was a very sad case at Children's with our pediatric group. And Children's is like the biggest pediatric neurosurgical group in the world, and had been doing a bunch of these, and then kind of uncontrollably, a poor kid ended up having massive brain swelling and died. And no one really knows what it's about, why that happens. I personally think that heat is dangerous, right? Heat has, very high temperature heat can do things that we can't really control. So even though with MR you can tell where that heat signature is ending, it may have other effects. So here comes cryoablation, right? We're all familiar. So it's the opposite, heat versus cold, ice versus a heat pack. What do we do for a sore muscle, right? So cryoablation has been around, and it's now being done for a ton of things, right? And cryoablation has been done in the liver for liver masses. It's been done for liposuction, I guess, now too, a ton of things. And so we have a group that we have a very extensive imaging system, intraoperative imaging suite, the Amigo suite at the Brigham. And in collaboration with one of my radiologists who started to think about doing some cryoablation, the whole idea was, let's use ice, and let's use the proverbial ice cube. This ice cube, not that ice cube. Although this ice cube could be angry enough that it could scare away some tumors, I suppose. But let's freeze these tumors like they do in the chest and like they do in the liver, and let's see if we can do that for some of these epidural tumors. So we've done 14 patients, all metastasis of varying ages and whatnot, with epidural compression. And these patients fit into the category of either too sick to really have surgery, like they weren't surgical candidates, but they could go through this type of procedure, or asymptomatic, but yet with pretty bad cord compression. And we're like, well, we're not happy with it, but we're not going to just sit here and wait for them to develop symptoms. Let's do something about it. And ultimately, most of these patients presented with pain, and some with some neurologic issues. Here's a short graph of how the pain gets improved. But this is our setup, and we've submitted this for publication. It's very similar to what Claudio's doing with LIT, but this is with a cryoablator. And ultimately, here's this tumor here, and here's the setup with the Amigo suite. Here's the grid, and here's another, this tumor here. And at the end of it, you can see how a little bit of that part regressed out here. And on this one, this was a much more extensive epidural tumor. This is pre and this is post. And you can see how that tumor really shrank back and regressed. And so we haven't done this in the brain yet. I'm trying to convince my colleagues to try it. I actually think that you'll avoid some of that massive brain swelling that happens rarely, but when it happens, you can't control it. And so I just wanted to show you guys a little bit about what we're doing at the Brigham with cryoablation for spinal tumors. Thank you.